Hi, everybody, and welcome to On the Other Hand. I hope you're excited as I am about our guest today. His name is Chris Powell, and he's been on the show before, so I hope you remember him. Let me give you a little bit of information about him, okay? Because I think he brings a perspective to the show that we really, really need. He's going to open your eyes to some things that are going on. We're going to talk about budget and tolls and anything his little heart desires and anything I can fake if I don't know the answers, okay? But anyways, Chris Powell, delightful gentleman, joined the Journal-Inquirer in 1967. He started out working in the press and circulation departments, as well as the news department before becoming a reporter and then the editor. Chris is a member of the board of directors of the Connecticut Council on Freedom of Information and was its legislative chairman for many years. He said he just retired from that not too long ago. Now, Chris writes a political column for the JI, Journal-Inquirer, and I encourage viewers to take a look at some of his articles. Welcome, Chris. Welcome to this show. I'm delighted you're coming here today. I have to tell you, though, if there's one thing that I'm not very good at, and that's math, okay? And as a matter of fact, I'm terrible at math. And I said to Chris, is there anything particular you want to talk about? And he said, well, we can talk about budget. So being a glutton for punishment, which I am obviously, I went out onto the Connecticut's budget and saw 45 pages. I repeat that for you. 45 pages of math, arithmetic, and all kinds of, in millions. So, Chris, you and I have to understand each other from day one, and this is it. If you're going to talk in millions, I'm talking in nickels and dimes. So we have to understand each other there, okay? When you're going to say the budget is this many millions, I, on the other hand, am going to say to you, okay, but let me tell you where they collect the taxes from. So we got an understand, shake hands. Are we understanding?
Okay.
Okay. Do not say to me, Murdy, what do you think about, them spending $47 million on cats, okay? Because I will be totally lost. But if you say to me, well, do you know how many taxes there are on the population in Connecticut? I will be able to say, yes, I just happen to have that. And I'll tell you all about those, let's see, withholding tax, sales tax, corporation. Well, anyway, I don't want to steal my own thunder. So tell me what you'd like to talk about first.
Well, I think we can talk about the general decline of Connecticut.
That wasn't in the list you gave me.
No,
but
there was a Bloomberg News story the other day which analyzed the Census Bureau and Internal Revenue Service data for the years 2015, 2016, and the data, Bloomberg said, found that Connecticut in that year lost 1.6% of its population's annual adjusted gross income. This is the problem Connecticut has had, not just of population migration, but of income migration. We are losing self-sufficient, prosperous people to lesser taxed states, and we're gaining people who are not as prosperous and not as self-sufficient,
right,
and who are lowering the averages of wealth in Connecticut. Now, this situation is not peculiar to Connecticut. It's also severe in the neighboring high-tax states of New York and New Jersey. But this study suggests that we don't necessarily have to worry about scaring the billionaires out of the state by raising taxes on the super rich. We are already discouraging many people who are making middle class and upper middle class incomes in the state. There's a lot of income migration out of the state, so much so that in the year for which the most recent figures are available, Connecticut lost 1.6% of its income. By contrast, Florida gained 3%.
Sure.
And of course, many Connecticut residents have been moving to Florida. In fact, the estimate for this income migration in Florida was that people moving from Connecticut to Florida average an income of about $250,000 a year. So it seems like our wealthiest people who are moving out of the state are very happy with Florida. Now,
Sure.
Florida, of course, is not heaven on earth. I've been there a few times, and it's certainly nice if you like the beach, but most of Florida is not the beach. You know, it's a very flat, prairie-like state. They have alligators and Burmese pythons that make our annoying bears look like cuddly pets. They have year-round insects, and their hurricanes do far more damage than our snowstorms do. But they don't have a state income tax. In part, they're able to avoid it because they've got so much tourism down there. But we are competing with them, and I don't think state government appreciates that people have choices as to where they live. I don't think state government understands that it is not improving the living conditions in Connecticut. For the most part, in the last 20 years, it's been impoverishing the state.
Right.
And we see this now very well documented in this Bloomberg study. We have a serious problem of income migration out of the state. I think it's a general indictment of state government policy. We can go into those policies if you want, but I don't think the governor or the Democratic majority in the legislature have the slightest appreciation of this.
I agree with you. See, I told you we're going to talk. You're going to talk the big stuff. I'm talking the little stuff. Okay. And once I started looking into this, and I went, I can't believe it. I already did a couple of them. Withholding personal income tax, right? Sales and use tax, corporation tax, public service tax. This is all stuff that's coming out of our pockets. Inheritance and estate tax, insurance company tax. How many of you people knew that? Cigarette tax, we knew that. Real estate conveyance tax, which is going to kill us if they get their way with that. We'll talk about that after. Alcoholic beverage tax. So all the small business owners have that to contend with. Health provider tax. Miscellaneous tax. I love that one. Miscellaneous tax. Yeah, my dog or cat is going to pay for that. Unbelievable. Motor fuels tax. Oil company tax. And let's see, what else did they have here? I almost died. Okay, let's see. And Connecticut drivers pay 43.8 cents per gallon in state taxes, and then we got an 18.8 cent per gallon in other taxes, which is the federal taxes, right? So we're really paying 62.2 cents per gallon in taxes. I read all this stuff today after, talking to you, and I went, I'm going to hyperventilate before this is over. Do they realize how much revenue they're getting on just little things that we don't even pay attention to?
Well, they do their best to hide taxes in the cost of living. They put taxes on products before they reach the point of sale, so we don't see the taxes that are embedded in the price. But I argue, Murty, that it's not so much the volume or degree of taxes that are bothersome. What's most bothersome, I think, is that what are we getting for it? I don't think our major, most expensive policies are working. I don't think our educational policies are educating, because the standardized tests every year show that 2/3 of the high school graduates in Connecticut never master high school math or high school English. Most of the freshmen being admitted into public colleges in the state are are having to take remedial high school courses. I think that shows that we're paying for 16 years of education, public education, but we're not even getting 12 anymore. Our main educational policy in Connecticut, I think, is just social promotion. I think every kid knows that he doesn't have to learn anything to get promoted from grade to grade, and not only that, he doesn't have to learn anything to graduate from high school. And even if he hasn't learned anything in high school, or learned only that he didn't have to learn anything, he will be, in many cases, promoted to a public college where he can take high school all over again. This is, I think, a catastrophic waste. Our welfare policy, I think, is not producing self-sufficiency. I think it's just perpetuating dependence. Our urban policy is making the cities even more demoralized and dysfunctional and corrupt. Urban policy isn't working. But what is the policy response to all these failures? I think is, well, let's just do more of what's not working.
Let's just throw more money at it.
We can't challenge any of the premises here. And then we've got our public employee labor policy, of course, which is basically not to control the cost at all. That's what collective bargaining and binding arbitration of government employee union contracts is about. Those contracts, the great bulk of cost of government is what they now call a fixed cost. That means we can't do anything about it. It's all set by statute, and it's outside the democratic process. I think we've got to resubject it to the democratic process.
Okay, I'm not against bargaining units, and I'm not against, I think they've done a lot of good for a lot of people, but I don't think we've offered them an option either, whereas everything at, let's go to Northeast Utilities, okay, when I worked there for Salem P and Northeast Utilities, okay, the labor unions were able to opt into 401k with a 3% match, and they did. And we, as non-union people, followed along, and that really was what helped me, the 401k, when my husband got sick, and I had a little cushion there to pay for his convalescent care. So I can't totally fault the state unions, because years ago, when they first became unionized, they needed that, because otherwise they were at the mercy of the big guy. So I can understand where that concept came from. And like anybody, and you have to admit it, like anybody, if you have something in your hand, you're not crazy about letting it go. So how do we change it?
Well, I'm talking only about the government employee unions, and I'm talking only about the mechanism by which we run the government. I find collective bargaining and binding arbitration for government employees to be completely undemocratic. It lowers the sovereignty of the public to the level of the same equality with a special interest. Now, I'm not saying government employees ought not to be paid, decently. I am saying they ought not to be compensated better than the taxpayers who are paying for them, which is what we've come to right now. My objection is simply the loss of democracy. When you've got 70% or so of municipal expense being designated as a fixed cost outside the democratic process, beyond the control of the voters of any town, I find that objectionable. When you've got a very large percentage, a third perhaps or more of state government that is similarly described as a fixed cost outside the control of ordinary democracy, I have a problem with that. I just want to...
But how do you change it?
You change it? I would repeal collective bargaining and binding arbitration for government employees. It certainly doesn't serve the public. It serves only the government employees.
Okay,
Explain to me how it serves the public.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you how it serves the public. A lot of these state employees, okay, are the guys that keep your roads clean and are out 24 hours or 16 or 18 hours a day. They're the ones that patrol your roads and make sure if there's an accident, there's somebody there to take care of them.
Yeah, but we're not challenging the value of
Okay.
what
But
the
the
government
value-
provides in services.
Okay.
We're talking about the democracy of setting the price.
So you want to set the price for?
No, I want democracy to be able to control the costs of government. Our previous state budget director, Ben Barnes, often told people that more than 50% of the state budget is now outside the ordinary democratic process and a matter of what he called fixed costs. Well, when a majority of the state budget cannot be affected by the people's elected representatives in the ordinary budgeting process, something is wrong. A few hundred years ago, when Connecticut was a crown colony, we had a system by which
A few hundred years ago, yeah.
we had
I
a
guess
system
so.
by which all the major decisions, all the major financial decisions of government in Connecticut were taken out of the democratic process and reserved for an unelected official. It was a system called monarchy, and we fought a revolution against it. Well,
Okay,
we're in an equivalent situation today where most of the expense of government is outside democracy.
Okay, so now let's just pick anything. Let's pick a highway department. Okay, the highway department wants a 2% raise and then a 2%, 2.5 and 2. Okay, so we take that budget to the taxpayers and say, do you okay this 2%, 2.
No, we don't do that.
Then how do we do it?
Right now, we just take.
No, I mean in the future.
In the future,
your way.
yes, the taxpayers or the elected officials of the town or the state would decide on it. But right now, that's not what we do.
I know.
If there's any disagreement over the terms of employment and the compensation and benefits, it goes to arbitration, where an unelected official settles the matter. I find that undemocratic and objectionable, and as we see now, it has removed most of the costs of government from the democratic process. It is bankrupt in Connecticut, and I don't think we can restore the state until we change that system.
Usually, when anything goes to arbitration, it goes to 3. It goes to 1 from management. It goes from 1 from labor, 2 attorneys.
And they pick the third arbiter.
And the third one can be picked by agreement, not he's my buddy, so we're having him. By agreement, I know that. In some ways,
But that arbiter does not answer to the public. That decision is removed from the democratic process and given to somebody who's not elected. That's what I find objectionable. I'm not criticizing highway department workers. I'm not saying they don't do important work. I'm saying the decision should be made through the ordinary democratic process. Maybe they deserve a 10% raise. Maybe they deserve a 10% cut. That's not my argument. My argument is democracy. These big decisions of public expense should be made in the ordinary democratic way.
Well, that's why I love you, because you and I will never agree on this, okay? That's why I like to have you here, because to my way of thinking, and having worked at Northeast Utilities and seen...
But that's a private company. That's not the government.
But they still have unions.
That's
okay.
fine.
Okay.
I'm
Okay,
not
but wait a
talking
minute.
about the private sector.
Let me finish. I'm using it as an example. Okay, they have unions. They have labor, in management, okay, who talk to the union. And then if the 2 of them can't agree, then they go to an arbitrator outside there, not paid by Northeast Utilities, okay? Not paid by Northeast. Union pays part, management pays part, and the third one they split, okay? So you want to take that to the average guy that lives in Cromwell and let them vote on that union?
Or his elected officials, yes. The decision should be made in a democratic way when it involves government expense. Private sector companies,
Well, I was just using that as an example.
Right, let them do what they want. But
Right.
when it is the government, then the decision should be made through the ordinary democratic process. Now listen, elected officials They don't want these cost decisions to be made through the ordinary democratic process. Elected officials love collective bargaining and binding arbitration because it removes the bulk of public expense from their responsibility. Whatever happens, an elected official can just shrug and say, I can't do anything about it. Elected officials do not want to get caught between the taxpayers and the public on one hand and the public employee unions on the other, because the public employee unions in Connecticut are the biggest, most influential special interest in the state. Elected officials don't want to do the work of governing. They don't want to do the choosing. They don't want to get in a controversy between the taxpayers and the unions. They love collective bargaining and binding arbitration because it lets them pretend that they're mayor or pretend they're on the council, but the real person governing the town is the arbiter.
Well,
and nobody can vote for him.
I do know that going through this, that the Connecticut State Police Union has not had a contract since 2018. So, I mean, they're sitting in limbo. Okay.
Well, they just got a new contract, and
not according to the.
They just got a new contract a few days ago. It was ratified by the State House, and this contract is immensely objectionable because it allows the State Police Union to prevent disclosure of personnel files involving the performance of state troopers who've been accused of misconduct. The great objectionable provision of this new contract means it can nullify freedom of information law and prevent the public from finding out discipline or the failure to discipline state troopers. We have this terrible provision in state law that allows labor contracts of state employees to nullify ordinary freedom of information access that the public has. This contract never should have been ratified for that reason.
Can we disagree again?
Well, you don't think the public should have access to?
No, I don't, because in that could be where they live, how many people are in the family.
No,
how you
that's
can,
not what we're talking about.
Oh, yes, we are.
No,
we're talking personnel. I know what's in the personnel file.
Addresses are already exempted from disclosure for certain sensitive occupations. We're talking here about performance data. Somebody accused a trooper of misconduct, and it's been covered up. We should be able to get that.
How do you know it's been covered up?
No, I'm just saying, if it has, it can be covered up now under the new contract. The new contract says, nope, if the union objects, you can't get information about misconduct in the state police.
All right, we're going to disagree. Okay, this is fun because we can.
Well, we had that right until a few weeks ago. We no longer have that right because of the new contract.
All right.
And the terrible irony of it was that all the black and minority legislators who complain all the time about police brutality and unaccountability in the police, they saw this and they voted for the contract anyway, even though now we will not be able to find out about police misconduct. That the loyalty of the black and minority legislators to the government employee unions was higher than their loyalty to their own constituents.
Okay. All right, let's argue about tolls. No, we probably won't argue about tolls. All right. Well, so we'll move on from the budget stuff, and what we'll do is we'll move on to tolls. All right? Are you people paying attention to this? Isn't this great? Nothing like an Irishman, and what are you?
Oh, I'm a mix of
He's a mix. So, but I was a McGinley, so I love an argument, love a good argument. Okay. Now, let's talk about tolls, because Chris Powell had an article about tolls, okay? So talk to me about what your stance is on tolls.
My general feeling, Murdy, is I don't want to give them another cent because I find the most expensive policies of state government so counterproductive. Giving them more money will just allow them to continue those counterproductive policies. Tolls, as proposed right now, I'm afraid, are not really for transportation. Tolls, in my opinion, are to give state government another fantastic revenue stream so that state government does not have to economize anywhere else in the budget in favor of transportation. Governor Lamont, with his budget proposal, has essentially proclaimed we're not going to economize anywhere in government in Connecticut. If we have such a transportation infrastructure emergency, you think you might, look through the rest of the budget and say, well, let's find some things that are not as important as fixing the roads and the bridges and the railroads. But that's not what we're doing. We're going to have tolls, or tolls have been proposed, precisely to avoid economizing in the rest of government.
In the rest of
and
government.
that's why
Yeah.
all the government employee unions and everybody on the government payroll outside transportation supports tolls, because they don't want the government coming in, taking a look
Any of their
at their appropriations to see
right.
where we might
Right.
economize there. Tolls are not for transportation. Tolls are for avoiding economy in the rest of the government.
I agree with you. And Lamont as much as said that there's no guarantee that they won't take some of that toll money and use it someplace else if they needed it, which made my hair stand on end, because I said, wait a minute, you say you need this for infrastructure, and you need it for this, and you need it for that, and yet you're telling us, and where did all this transportation money go for all these years?
Well, some of it went to transportation, and some of it has been used to pay the salaries of the people in the transportation and motor vehicles departments. That was classified as a transportation expense, and it was really a personnel expense. It wasn't an infrastructure expense, but all this dedicated fund stuff, in my opinion, Murdy, is nonsense. It can usually be evaded, and it probably should be much more flexible. If we had a nuclear war emergency in Connecticut, and we couldn't divert money out of a dedicated fund, that would be crazy.
Awful. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, once again, I think the problem is the elected officials do not want to have to make decisions. They don't want to be accountable for their decisions. The old saying is, to govern is to choose. Well, nobody wants to choose, and I understand that. It's
because it'll cost them their job.
Well, it will be a controversy. You'll have to disappoint somebody, but that's why we have arbiters to do it.
Right.
I mean, let's find somebody who's not elected, who can make all the controversial decisions, and you can still pretend you're the mayor, but you just don't have any authority. The real reform, the sneaky reform of binding arbitration in Connecticut, Murdy, would be to elect the arbiter, to say, okay, well, let's still have binding arbitration, but every town will elect its own arbiter, so that the mayor can still pretend to be mayor, and the council members can still pretend to be council members, and the school board members can pretend to be school board members, but we'll elect an arbiter, and the arbiter will make all the financial decisions in the town. Now, you'd still have binding arbitration, but the unions would never go for that. Why? Because they don't want the person making financial decisions to be elected, to be accountable to anybody but them. But that would be the reform. Okay, let's show people how things really work. Let's elect the arbiter.
Okay, so you're going to leave the unions alone, am I right, and management alone, and then they
That would be one reform.
Yeah, and then they disagree, and then the arbiter, who is elected, makes the final decision.
The arbiter would effectively be the mayor.
Then how do we keep politics out of it?
You don't. You don't keep politics out of democracy. You don't keep politics out of budgeting.
Well,
Budgeting is politics.
So you're a Republican mayor and you want to get reelected, and you appoint me as a Republican arbiter. What's the chance, or I get elected as the Republican arbiter, what's the chances of that I'm going to go against you?
Well, you do what you think is best, and you answer to the people for it because you're elected. But no arbiter in Connecticut right now answers to anybody.
Right. Well, now, if you were in Bridgeport or New Haven or some of the other larger cities, Nancy Pelosi not too long ago said, if a glass of water had a D by its name, people would vote for it. Okay? So doesn't that fly in the face of the arbiter being elected?
No, I don't think so. Look, we have elections to reflect the public will, and sometimes the public will is well reflected by who we elect, and sometimes it's not. But that's democracy for you. I mean, we have to take responsibility as citizens, as voters, and elect the people we think best for the job. If 70% of the municipal budget is going to unionized personnel, the person determining that should be elected.
Okay, okay, all right.
I mean, otherwise we don't have a democracy. Why bother having elections? I think it's a fair question now why we have elections when 70% of municipal expenses can't even be determined through the democratic process.
Okay. You really want to come back on this show again?
Well, I mean, you asked.
That's worthwhile. Okay, you had another article. Okay, you ready? See, I did all my homework, okay. You had another article about ICE. Now, do not bring an arbiter up here,
No,
all right? You promised me faithfully.
I don't think there's any arbiters
Are you
involved
sure?
in immigration
Okay.
enforcement.
All right, because I'm holding you to it. I'm holding you to it, okay? Talk to me. You had this really, really great article about the legislature not wanting to cooperate with ICE. And I mean, it was a really great article. I read it, okay? Why, in heaven's name, wouldn't the state of Connecticut want to cooperate with ICE? I just don't understand it. We're talking illegal here. And isn't that the job of our municipal to protect the people that are here and to make sure you do things legally? I mean, my family came from Ireland legally, came through Ellis Island. We can track them, okay? Why would we tell our people that they cannot cooperate with ICE?
Well, I think there's two motivations behind it. The first is that there are a lot of people living in Connecticut, as throughout the country, who entered the country illegally. We're not talking here about the kids who were brought in illegally and didn't know any other country. But we do have a lot of people in the country illegally who've been living here for many years, who are established in their communities, and uprooting them would be a really terrible hardship for them. In many, maybe even most cases, they're good citizens. I mean, the president likes to portray illegal immigrants as a largely criminal class, or to imply that they are, but for the most part they're not. It's not to say they should be here, but nevertheless, we do have a lot of people who've been illegally in the country for many years, whose lives are very much intertwined with our communities, and people find it very hard to expel them, and don't think it's worth the emotional toll on those people. I understand that. There have been periodic amnesties in U.S. history. We had Simpson-Mazzoli back in, I think, 1986, amnesty to millions of people. Of course, the deal with Simpson-Mazzoli was, okay, we'll amnesty all these people who came in illegally up to this point, but we'll start enforcing the law now, but we never did. So here we are again with demands for another amnesty. And then there are people who I think are very influential in the Democratic Party in Connecticut, who don't believe the United States should have any borders at all, that there should be no controls on immigration, which, as far as I can see, means that you don't have a country at all. No. The borders are down. Anybody can come here. You can get a few $100 million from China or Brazil or anywhere. Anybody can come here. And actually, there's some ideological conservatives who argue against any immigration laws as well. I mean, to me, I think if you don't have borders, if you don't have a system controlling immigration, very soon you're not a country at all. But people who believe in open borders are very influential in the Democratic Party in Connecticut, and so they don't want any immigration law enforced. They believe in nullification of federal law, and I think that is contributing very heavily to the legislation that just passed the legislature, or the Senate, I guess, the other day, which will forbid any official anywhere in Connecticut from cooperating with immigration law enforcement, which is really nullification. And I'm afraid the open borders people in Connecticut are running the show.
Excuse me. I went on and looked at some of these laws that they proposed, and it said it also would limit the circumstances under which law enforcement officers may disclose confidential information to a federal immigration authority, and it would no longer would allow local authorities to detain an undocumented immigrant on the basis of being a threat to public safety. So they're saying you are a public threat, but we're not going to, they passed this, these people in Hartford?
It's an extraordinary exemption, Murdy, and
we need to get rid of that whole mess up there.
I find that appalling, but you have to remember that a lot of these people do not believe that there should be any controls on immigration at all, and many of them are so contemptuous of Trump that they're ready to pull the nation apart.
That's exactly. I couldn't believe it. So if you're a criminal, we can't even give you to ICE or give your name to ICE, or we can't say come and get this person. No.
That is the impulse among the Democrats to subvert the Trump administration any way they can, even if it means nullifying federal law.
It blew my mind when I read that. I said, okay, so the U.S. citizen isn't as important, and their lives are not as important, or their homes are not as important, or their goods are not as important as the rights of an illegal immigrant, so we're not going to tell on you. That blew my mind.
Well, it is appalling to me, too.
Good. Oh, wow. We did good on that one, didn't we, huh? We got to stay away from budget and unions, and we do okay. All right. What else would you like to talk about? Anything exciting? I'm not going to touch that. How about, I'm just passing over two of them. How about legalizing this marijuana thing? Now, you talk to me about that, because I read that and I went, what are they talking about?
Well, it's a complicated issue. There's a lot of support in the legislature, but apparently not enough support in the legislature for not just decriminalizing marijuana, but for setting up a licensed system for its sale and taxation in the state. There's the hope that this would bring in a lot of money for state government for spending on all sorts of things that probably don't work now and won't work in the future, but they'll have a lot more money to do what doesn't work. I have a couple problems with it. I mean, I'm generally libertarian about drugs generally. I mean, the war on drugs has been a catastrophic failure, and I think the criminalization, the contrabanding of drugs has probably caused more damage than the drugs themselves over the years. However, you gotta accept, I think, that while marijuana is probably a milder drug than some of the things that are in circulation now, it still does harm. It does not improve lives by casual users or anything like that. So there will be more intoxication. There'll be more accidents caused by intoxication. I would be inclined, if it was up to me, I'd probably decriminalize the drug and leave it to the feds to enforce the ban on marijuana. I would not set up a tax and licensing system for its sale at this point, if just because marijuana remains prohibited by federal law.
Right.
And I think if we go beyond decriminalization, if we license and tax the sale, then in effect it's more nullification of federal law, just like the immigration stuff we're doing is nullification of federal law. So at least until the federal government repeals its prohibition on marijuana, I don't think we should go
down that road.
Well, I don't think we should license and tax the sale. It'd be fine with me if we totally decriminalized it and totally decriminalized, I think, all the drugs and just put our efforts into drug rehabilitation. But to get the state into the marijuana business when it's still prohibited by federal law, that's too much nullification for me.
They talked about in this article, okay, Control Commission, cannabis, is that what you say? I'm no druggie. Cannabis Control Commission would be created. Oh, another little bureaucratic group, right? Okay.
I bet the commissioner will have a very nice pension.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, jeez. No candy, no cute packaging. Can't make them look like gummy bears, right? They take away all the pot arrests going back to 1998. Okay. You wouldn't be able to toke up in a smoking lounge. I didn't even know what the word toke up was. I said, oh, I'm learning something, right? And you won't be able to smoke weed in restaurants or public buildings either. Oh, isn't this wonderful? Oh, this is great, right? And let's see. The legislation includes provisions designed to ensure minority entrepreneurs have an entry point into the multi-million marijuana industry by granting them first access to cultivation and other types of licenses. Did you know that?
This is a proposal for racial patronage. In fact, I think in Massachusetts, they've already set up a bank of sorts to lend money to members of minority groups for getting into the marijuana business. You know, the rationale for this, or the argument for it, is that, well, the minority communities have been damaged most by drug criminalization. And I suppose they have, insofar as more members of minority groups got into the drug dealing business. But they also probably made more money from those that didn't get busted, that
I'm not going there.
Didn't go to prison. Well, if they're telling us that the minority community got more damaged by criminalization, they're also telling us that that's where the drug dealing was concentrated. And if that's where the drug dealing was concentrated, that's where the money was made.
No.
I don't believe in racial patronage. I do think if we're making any money from marijuana, it ought to be put into drug rehabilitation, not racial patronage.
Marijuana and driving will not be tolerated. That tickled me. I mean, really,
because
give me a break.
there's no test for that is easily available to the cops to judge whether people are intoxicated by marijuana.
This stuff? On top of that, they write low income, no problem. One bill would require a lower fee structure based on applicants' assets and income.
Yeah. Well,
so
they see big money in a marijuana business, and
what kind of people do we put into the legislature? Would you tell me that?
People who believe in collective bargaining and binding arbitration of government employee union contracts. Do you think this is any saner than that?
I don't think anything's very sane at this point. Oh, I mean, it just blew my mind when I saw some of this stuff. I said, I cannot believe that we vote these people into office and then they come up with some of these cockamamie ideas of what we as citizens should have to put up with. Now, it's going to be like anything else. You know they're going to smoke the marijuana, and the kids especially, and they're going to say, oh, you want to go to the beach? And they're going to get behind the wheel, and then they're going to hit somebody.
Well,
and then these people are going to be running around, raising their hands, weeping and wailing and saying, how did this happen?
There's another potential flaw in the premise of this licensing and tax system, and that is if the state tax on marijuana is substantial, it will not run the unlicensed dealers out of business.
That's true.
The unlicensed dealers will stay in business and undercut the state's sales by tax evasion. And that's why some people think that the expectations of revenue from licensing and taxing marijuana are probably exaggerated.
Now, it says by a vote of 21 to 19, mostly along party lines, the Judiciary Committee passed the second legal marijuana bill of the legislative session. Both bills still have to be voted on. Now, have you heard anything about them being voted on?
Yeah, well, no, there has been no vote on general marijuana legalization
We're
yet.
coming to the end,
And it's because it appears that the votes are not there. That the advocates of legalizing marijuana have acknowledged lately that they do not yet have the votes for legalization, that will probably be put off for another year. Now, that means that there is a substantial split within the Democratic Party that controls the legislature on marijuana. Apparently, there is a large number of Democrats who are not prepared to legalize it and tax it, and most of the Republicans seem to be against it.
Okay. I didn't know whether or not you had more up-to-date information than what I found today. And I thought, well...
Well, the advocates of legalizing and taxing marijuana say that they do not have the votes.
They don't have the votes.
And that it's not likely to pass this year.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, we'll take every little bit we can, right? Because I really do think it's just another way to put stuff in kids' hands, okay? I mean, we tell the gentlemen and ladies that sell liquor, you cannot sell below this age, which I'm definitely in favor of.
And now we're raising the age for cigarettes to 21 as well.
Exactly.
I mean,
but there's nothing in this bill that says that the kids in high school can't go out and buy a joint.
well, I'm
find
sure
it
that they
somewhere.
would have a 21-year age limit on sale of marijuana, but it's
show me any bill.
illusionary because you're just going to get a friend who's older to buy it for you. I mean, the 21 age on liquor doesn't keep liquor from getting into the hands of minors. The new 21 age on cigarettes is not going to keep cigarettes from getting into the hands of minors. I mean, it will have a small effect, but anybody who is under 21 who really wants a cigarette or really wants liquor or really wants marijuana will be able to get it.
They'll find some way.
Well, they'll get it
Yeah.
from an older friend.
Right, right. And there's no way that anybody that owns, a package store or owns a little drugstore or owns a gas station can possibly know who Murdy could go in and buy, cigarettes, go outside and hand them to my next door neighbor. So who's to know, right?
Yeah, well,
I agree.
It's not much of a safeguard.
Right, right. Okay, what else do you want to argue about? Pick a subject, we'll argue.
well-
If I haven't got a note on it, I'll tell you.
I may be advocating from time to time positions that sound Republican, or at least contrary to the positions of the
you
Democratic
stole my
majority in Connecticut. But the Republican Party in Connecticut has not done a very good job
We did a lousy job.
in recent years of articulating alternative policy positions. I often don't know what the Republican Party in Connecticut stands for.
I agree.
And I understand the Republicans are reluctant to take policy positions that are going to make enemies, but
Did darn well better.
until somebody articulates contrary policy positions
Yeah.
in politics in Connecticut, the state will continue to go on the downward path it's on now, and there will be no change.
I agree.
I hope the Republican Party
Wakes
will. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I think the Republicans have loved being in the minority, because when you're in the minority, you don't have to take any responsibility. You can just vote no. You can shake your finger at the majority and criticize and never have to present an alternative. And I think they've been pretty comfortable in that
Well, we better wake
position.
up. But now, one other thing that really blew my mind, and I'm going to talk to you about that, was when we were talking about the budget. Oh, please. Okay. The real estate conveyance tax increase rates, okay, are going to go 0.85 and 1.40. Okay, now, my daughter is in real estate. And she said to me, when we were talking about this, she said, Mom, the housing market hasn't recovered yet. These are her words, okay? She said, raising taxes on real estate transactions will impact sales. She just lost one. Towns already suffering with high mill rates, and I can't even tell you what Cromwell's is right now today. And for example, she lost this. Example, East Hartford, a home selling for $220,000 has a I apologize, I read that wrong. For $220,000 has an $8,000 tax due to the 47.66 mill rate. What happens when the state takes the car property tax and towns are forced to raise their mill rates even higher? How many people will move out of state before the legislature wakes up?
Well, any tax is a discouragement, and you know, you can work this problem into the income migration survey that Bloomberg did last week. Taxes are a discouragement. They are justified only insofar as they improve living conditions.
Right.
And I suspect that even the billionaires in Connecticut wouldn't mind taxes going up so much if they saw that government was improving the state rather than impoverishing the state.
Exactly. If they could look and see something going,
but that's not
better.
what is happening. What's happening in Connecticut, we are just maintaining the status quo of happiness of the government and welfare classes. Education's not improving. Welfare is not being converted to self-sufficiency. I'm sorry, your government employee labor costs are only going up, and the efficiency of the state workforce is not going up. Any tax is a discouragement.
Right.
But government loves taxes like, you know, the real estate conveyance tax, because unlike the income tax and unlike the sales tax or the gasoline tax, it's much less visible.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, this gets, you know, worked into the price of a house. And in the case of the real estate conveyance tax, Murdy, I suspect the politicians, the typical legislators, are looking at this thinking, well, you know, real estate values are stagnant or falling, and if they're falling, we'll prop up the price by raising the real estate conveyance tax, and you know, nobody will be the wiser. Your daughter will be the wiser, but you know, will the public be the wiser?
No,
it'll just be another general sense that taxes are going up in Connecticut, and they're not giving us really any improvement for them.
They sure aren't. They're proposed changes, and I'm not sure. I think these are coming from the legislature, because I did not write down here where they were, but increase the cigarette tax from $4.35 per
they're
pack.
Desperate for money any way they can get it right now, and all these little things they will take money from.
See, I don't smoke. So I didn't even know that you're paying $4.35 per pack to $4.60. I didn't know that we taxed them that. I mean, crazy like that, you know. And then there's and this one made me laugh out loud because I don't smoke cigars. I want you to know that. All right. And it says increase tax from 50 cents to $1.50 on cigars. So if you smoke a cigar, give it up, because you can't afford that, right?
Well, I guess there's probably not a big cigar lobby in Connecticut.
Not a big cigar lobby.
So, you know, if the cigar smokers are vulnerable, they're going to get hit.
I saw that. I said, oh, I can't believe this stuff. And now they want to, legislative, eliminate the new exemption for Social Security income. I didn't even know there was one. I'm going to keep an eye on that.
Well, they're always passing tax cuts for the future, and
Right.
then when the future comes, they
They
repeal
want
them.
to repeal. That's exactly what they did. They want to eliminate new exemption for pension income. I thought that was interesting. Increase hotel occupancy from 15 to 17%. Who wants to stay in Connecticut right now at this point, right? And this one's going to get the average lady and gentleman. Repeal exemption for non-prescription drugs. So does that mean if I go in and buy aspirin now, they're going to tax me?
You know, it'll be a tax on pain, but it's a
We just being in Connecticut, we should get free
yeah.
aspirin, right? You know, so
well, they are desperate for money because they absolutely refuse to economize in government, or even to look at policies to see if they're really accomplishing what they're supposed to do. That is the absolute sine qua non of the Democratic Party in Connecticut, is no cutting back anywhere, no questioning of anything. We're just going to do more of what we're doing now, and if it doesn't work, that's okay.
Well, we're gonna nickel and dime all these people to death. And you know, you're absolutely right. You know, if my family wasn't here in Connecticut, I would consider going to the Carolinas to move down there. But when you have a family and you've got friends and you've got, you know, you're involved in the community, what are you going to do?
A lot more people complain that they're leaving than actually leave. I tell people that when they say when they're threatening to leave Connecticut, all they're doing is advertising that they're still here. But we all know people who have left the state for quality of life reasons and tax reasons.
Yep.
The Bloomberg study last week shows that income migration is a hugely expensive problem for Connecticut. 3 years ago, it added up to 1.6% of the state's population's adjusted gross income. That is enormous. If we were losing 1.6% of our population's income every year, and in 10 years, I mean, that's 15% of the state's income. You can't survive that kind of income migration, and it is happening.
Right. Okay, we got 2 minutes left. This has been fun.
It's your lucky day.
I'm going to let you you can have 1 minute. Wow. What would you like to say to the viewers?
I would encourage people to become more engaged in our civic life. I think the essential problem in Connecticut the last 50 years has been the decline in civic engagement, as measured by voter participation, as registered by voter enrollment. The best calculations we've been able to do with the newspaper are that 25% or more of our eligible adult population in Connecticut never even registers to vote. And that perhaps 50% of the eligible adult population, not the registered voters, but the people who are eligible to register to vote, 50% may not even be voting in presidential elections. I mean, that suggests a complete lack of civic virtue, and I think that's the underlying problem in the state.
Guess what? We agree. I like that. Wow, we're leaving on a positive note. And what I'd like to say to all of you out there is thank you very much for joining us today. And also, as I do each time, I will say thank you to our military and our veterans, our first responders, firemen, police, all those people that are there for you, the people that, main the ambulances, all the little guys that are unsung heroes that nobody stops and takes the time to say thank you very much. So tonight, from Chris and I, we can agree on that. Thank you very much, and God bless America. Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Come back when you want to fight.